Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's virtual reading and workshop with Diane Seuss. I am James Allen Hall, director of the Rose O'Neill Literary House, which is pleased to co-present tonight's event alongside our partners, the Boutel Day Poetry Center at Smith College and the Stadler Center for the Literary Arts at Bucknell University. Together, we comprise the Small Literary Arts Centers Coalition, or SLAC, for those of us who enjoy a good acronym and who doesn't enjoy a good acronym. SLAC's mission is to showcase the literary arts' broad reach, particularly in areas where the lyricism and immediacy of poetry provokes insight and astonishment. Those are two very good words to seg into in order to introduce our tonight's writer, Diane Seuss, whose work is characterized by insight and astonishment and also always creates wonder. Seuss is the author of 6 poetry collections, including most recently Modern Poetry, by the book. It's a collection which explores the education in grief, loss, recovery, and learning to love the world again. Seuss's book, Frank Sonnets, I shall now buy this book too, won the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the LA Times Book Prize, and the Penn Volcker Award. Her book, Still Life with Two Dead Peacocks and a Girl, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and the LA Times Book Prize, and her book, Four-Legged Girl, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. She's the recipient of awards from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, as well as the Guggenheim Foundation. I love that in the note included on the book jacket for Modern Poetry, this fact completes the biography. She was raised by a single mother in rural Michigan, which she continues to call home. That's really awesome. Di holds a master's degree in social work from Western Michigan University. She practiced social work for about 15 years, working in a domestic assault shelter, a crisis counseling center, a health psychology clinic, and in private practice. All along, she was writing poems and teaching creative writing at Kalamazoo College, where she taught for nigh on 3 decades. Um, Diane is also a finalist this year for the National Book Award, which we find out about on Wednesday evening. So please keep your fingers and your toes crossed. Welcome, Diane Seuss.
Thank you, James, and thank you for coming up with this subject and inviting me to be here.
Absolutely my pleasure. I forgot also to say that everyone, I'm wearing my pronouns on my lapel here. When I was once like sort of cyberbullied about my pronouns on Zoom, and I had posted about it or something, and Di sent me this pin.
Mhm.
It has been my own shield against hate, gender hate, gender variance hate. And so I just want to say a very public thank you
Mm,
for that, Di. It was an incredibly generous gesture and something I feel like characterizes you as a person.
thank you. I got on Etsy fast, man. I
To
was
say nothing of
searching.
the tube of lipstick you also sent me, which I love.
I sent you lipstick too, yes.
Yes, indeed. So to start things off a little bit, I thought we could start with well, first of all, did I get anything wrong in your bio?
No,
Okay, good. All
no,
right.
beautiful.
Oh, good. I
It's
just
sort
wanted
of
to make sure I didn't.
embarrassing. I think back to the kid I was or the teenager I was, and I would have been like "Bleh," to all, to all of it. But it's cool. So thank you.
I feel like the I read those sort of long bios for the kids we were,
Mhm.
right? Like who needs to still hear those things,
Yeah.
you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Um,
all,
yeah.
all those kids who are listening, all those students, all those college students, thank you for being here and for being readers and, for tuning in. I hope we make a connection even through this weird mode.
Indeed. And of course, we're going to be talking about pretty sensitive subjects. I think that's in the title. So we'll really talk about the range of sort of mental health struggles. So feel free if you need to drop off and check out the recording later. That's totally fine too. Maybe we could start with a poem where you're going to read mostly, I think, all exclusively from modern poetry, I hope.
Mhm.
And could you read Little Fugue State that starts the book off?
Sure. Yes, this is the first poem in modern poetry. And I like to think of often first poems and collections as sort of like the legend of a map. It kind of says, here's the lay of the land. Here's what we're going to work on here. And so for this poem, um, I was interested in both the fugue state, which is sort of a state of confusion, lostness, and amnesia, and the fugue, which is a music composition, um, which is sort of braided, tangled, multi-voiced. And so we'll see what happens here. Okay. Little fugue state. Far have I wandered, not knowing the names of where. Long have I woven this dress of human hair. Here I have pitched my tent, here and there, not knowing my name or where, not even the color of my hair, nor why it tangles so. Know where my comb goes, know where my brush, how far I wandered through underbrush into onrush, nor where my body was, nor what it called itself, nor the nature of my calling, nor what my scrawling meant. Not that scrawl then, nor this scrawl here, nor what a self could be, nor what a bee could be, nor breath, nor poetry. This dog I've walked and walked to death.
I love that poem. I love the playful rhymes and
Mm,
coupled with the really serious subject matter.
mhm.
The speaker hiding in the underbrush or in the onrush, right? Like, it suggests danger and fear. And the speaker sort of wanders far, you say, maybe the as far apart as social work and poetry. And I just wondered if you might talk a little bit about like your background as a social worker and a therapist. How did that
Mhm.
happen?
Yeah, well, I want to just briefly say that that poem, it really did describe my state of being as I walked into writing this book. And it was a really challenging state from which to write poems. I was scared and shutting down. This was midst of the pandemic. I live alone. And so, during the period of real isolation, and my dog Bear was my connection, and Bear died in the midst of it. And so you hear the braiding in to the fugue of the dog I've walked and walked to death, and also um, the elements of landscape from the place where I'm from. So underbrush, the sense of being in the midst of a natural world that I don't quite understand anymore. And so that's always, that's rare. It's rarely not a part of my poems, that place where I was raised, which is a small, rural, working class town in Southwest Michigan. Okay. So, how do I get to social work? Well, I was in college and I left. and moved to New York City. And I did all kinds of work. Um, I was a nanny for a while until one of the kids got lice and I couldn't handle it. And I worked in a vintage clothing shop with a cigar box for, the change and stuff, and you just used dollars. I worked in a fetish clothing store selling rubber underpants. And then I thought, okay, I need to make more money. So I worked I got a secretarial job at New York University School of Social Work. I didn't know what social work was. I was an English major when I left college. And as I typed grant proposals and sort of watched the flurry of what was going on, I thought, I could probably do that. That's something I could do. I was also writing Harlequin romances on the side. Um, so, writing and social work from the very beginning were just sort of like the fugue. They were braided together. They're really not separate. So I left New York with, a small suitcase and my life because I was in a very difficult situation with an addict who I loved. Um, and I returned to Michigan and decided to get a master's in social work. I had to finish my bachelor's first. And then in the process, this happens a lot, I think, to people who go into the clinical trades is you want to kind of go in as a fixer to the very shit that you need fixed in yourself. And so, you learn that over time that, I left an abusive situation and then I ended up working in domestic assault. I said to myself, I don't want to work with drug addicts. That's the one trigger I just don't want to deal with. Well, there I was dealing with addicts of every kind. And then in my own home, in my own family. So I did, as you described in the intro, I did various kinds of clinical practice, from working in a shelter to crisis work to private practice. Meanwhile, writing poems, meanwhile, starting to teach creative writing and also teaching social work. And finally, I went to a therapist myself and they said, who's this all for? What are you doing to yourself? And I was a new mother too. And I decided I needed to choose, and I chose just literature, teaching, and poetry. Um, but what I learned over time is we set up all these barriers between things definitionally, but there's really not much difference between sitting with a person and um, working with their story to help them evolve, and sitting with yourself and language and working with your story to evolve. Um, and as a teacher, I didn't see that. I mean, there's some crucial differences, but I really did the same kinds of work that I did as a therapist. So that's kind of the story of how I got there and the linkages I see between all of them.
Do you think being a badass poet helped you be a therapist? Do you feel like being a therapist helped you write your poems?
At the time when I was learning and practicing, I experienced them as tugging on each other. I would get home after a day, of hearing people's really difficult struggles and suffering. And I didn't want to turn to language. I wanted to get in the fetal position on the couch and watch, Price is Right. So it hasn't been until years later that I began to see how connected they are. Um, and I really did feel it's sort of like, leaving a marriage or something. Um, you find I can't do what I need to do on the earth and stay here. And that's how I experienced then. How I would experience it now, I think, would be somewhat different. But when I look back at making the decision to go to social work school, thinking I knew anything or had any wisdom is laughable. Um, and then, just slowly and gradually learning from my clients, um, and then needing, eventually to give it up for my own sanity. So, really a complicated evolution for me there.
Is the same complication true for poetry?
No.
Thank God.
Thank God. Yeah, no. And that's what I found when I sat with myself long enough. Poetry just doesn't feel like effort. And teaching creative writing, as much work as it is, I know many of you here know that, it never felt effortful. I think we just all have our sweet spot. Therapy, I was worried as a therapist a lot. I worried about my clients. I worried about getting it wrong. And I remember Ellen Bass, who's a pretty well-known poet, who wrote a book called Courage to Heal about healing from abuse. So she was sort of mixing it up there in the beginning too. And I went to a workshop with her back when that was her identity. And she said, if you are in a group of people who have survived suffering, you're going to be apologizing for getting it wrong more than feeling good about getting it right. That helped me. That made me feel better. But yeah, I never felt as solid, as on solid ground as I do as a writer and a teacher of writing.
I know that you've been intrigued by Gregory Orr's book, Poetry as Survival, and
Yeah,
I'm not familiar with that book. I think I need to be.
I want you to read it and I'm going to send it to you.
Oh, well, hey, I won't say no to free books and but yeah, I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, like survival mechanisms or coping mechanisms that language provides, or how can poetry serve us that way?
Oh, it's so much, James, but yeah, I'll try to be concise. So Gregory Orr is a poet who, when he was a kid, I think he was 10 maybe, had in a hunting accident, um, shot and killed his brother, who was maybe 3 years older than he. And the rest of his life and his writing career have been about um, understanding the meaning of that event, finding a way to live with it, to live with himself. And one of the things that he's done in that regard is writing poetry as survival, um, in which he includes essays about how sort of the place that poetry can situate itself to help people who have trauma. And that's all of us. That's all of us. Certainly now, many of us are experiencing a kind of national trauma, a global trauma from the violence and war that we're seeing around us. Um, so he says that the poem itself, and this is something that really changed the way I think about writing. So first of all, he talks about stages of writing, and he goes from rant, where you're just like spewing, which you must do sometimes, to journal in which you're sort of bringing order to your experience, to poetry. And poetry is the most aestheticized, made into something, um, maybe beautified or shaped. And therefore, because it's the most aestheticized, thought through, even philosophically, it's the most distant from the roiling center of the self. And that, he says, is why it can be so helpful, is that you begin to go from sort of being victimized by circumstance to shaping circumstance, what happens to you, into something, into an object, into an urn, into something that lasts, that isn't just stuck in you. I think about Emily Dickinson's poem, "After great pain, a formal feeling comes." That's the opening. And I've always been intrigued by that formal feeling, because I know what she means in the obvious sense that, like, say if you go to a funeral, there's a sort of formality to grief often, maybe especially in certain um, cultures and societies, a quietude around it. But then there's also the sense of the word formal, is that we we crave a form for that grief. We crave a place to put it. We want to make it into something that has a shape. Um, so, whether you're writing from your own experience, or from your experience of collective suffering, there's a lot that can be gleaned, Ora says, and I agree, from seeing language and responding to life as a developmental process or an evolutionary process. And that is, and I want to get here, that when we say mental health, when we talk about healing, I think it puts pressure on the writer or the person who is going through suffering. And that is the expectation that there's some sort of fix or resolution that you can gain through, making a poem or sitting in therapy or whatever. The goal is not fixing, is not sewing up, but it is creating that urn, creating that object of your experience. That doesn't mean it's fixed. And so to see the layers, I mean, I've been writing since I was, a kid. And to look back on those decades and decades of writing poems from my own experience, I see there's an evolution intellectually, creatively, emotionally, to, just as all of us experience through the process of growing up and aging. Um,
Mm.
so, we're in the depths of making meaning when we use language to describe our experiences. So, the last thing I want to say about or is that, writing, the process of writing and the process of selfhood are synonymous. And as he says, and this is a quote, the essential point is that for a poem to move us, it must bring us near our own threshold. We must feel genuinely threatened or destabilized by the poem's vision of disordering, even as we are simultaneously reassured and convinced by its orderings. In order to write well, a poet needs to go to that place where energy and intensity concentrate, that place just beyond which chaos and randomness reign. So he even tells the reader to sort of picture standing in the threshold of a doorway, and behind you is the sort of domestic safety and quietude, and in front of you is chaos. And from that threshold represents power. Um, so this tension in poems, it's one of the things I love about the genre of poetry, between order and disorder, is the excitement of a poem, but also it's our power as thinkers and writers to be able to corral chaos and to bring order to it. Um, so that first poem that I read, Little Fugue State, I was taking a whole situation for so many of us during that time period of political and emotional and cultural chaos, and bringing it in, really just a few lines into some sort of focus and order, using the fugue form, for instance, as a way to do that. So it's corralling these roiling feelings into a structure from that threshold. You can't write about it if you're not willing to experience it. And so you put yourself in that space where there's enough safety that you don't fall down or you don't fall apart, but in which you can be a witness to the very thing that you're describing. Does that make sense?
All of that made beautiful sense. And
Okay.
it also sort of articulated why, for me, in the pandemic, I could not read poetry.
Mm-hmm.
The only book of poems that I could read and sit with was Frank, was your book.
Mm,
I don't know if I've ever told you that.
no.
But there was something about the formalness of it and also
Mhm.
the pushing against it, and how much of the world you get into those poems. When I got to the fold out sonnet in that
Mhm.
book, I could fold it out for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just that was the pandemic for me, you know. Like,
Mhm.
I don't want to. Well, my book is stiff still. But
Well,
anyway, also I just want to let you know, someone let me know, Greg Orr is on the phone, on the call.
oh my God.
I know, isn't that so funny? Um,
Oh my God, I'm embarrassed.
no, not at all.
I
I want to give Greg Orr a shout out.
um Greg, or I've never met him, we've never spoken, but his work, his poems, his scholarship has changed my life. So Greg, I'm totally embarrassed, but thank you, thank you, thank you for everything you've done, the work you did, the painful work you did from your own life, and how you gave it to us. What would I have done without you? And we don't know each other, but we do. So thank you.
That's really wonderful. And yeah,
Oh my
I
God.
know, right? Isn't that the funniest
Can
moment
I go
in the world?
hide?
I'm
See,
sorry.
this is the part of me that, I always feel, and I think it's a good thing being from where I'm from and the cobbled education that I had. I always feel insecure and like, what the fuck do I know, and it's okay to experience that insecurity. It's probably, a big part of my aesthetic is to not know and to always be reaching but never quite there. So, oh, I feel like, I just like met Jesus or something.
Well,
God.
we put the link to Poetry as Survival in the chat so people can check it out. My students know his work too, so I don't know that book, but I can't wait to read it.
Yes.
I
And
didn't know I needed it like I did.
there's a really simple poem seemingly simple of his that I often started my classes with, and it's called Litany. And all the lines begin with I remember, and in which he takes the beyond language event of in his childhood with his brother, that loss, that trauma, and just names it concretely, um, one detail after another, ending, I remember this, I remember this, I remember this. It's religious. I mean, he calls it a litany. It's spiritual. It walks its way downward into that moment. And at the end, he's in his own bedroom, this kid, and somebody brings him soup. I always remember that phrase. And it's alphabet soup. And he sees these letters in the bowl, sort of swirling. And my students often felt, that's his eventual answer, is those letters form. Hi, Greg. Oh my God. Oh no, it's a different Greg. It's a different Gregor. Okay. Whew. God. Thank God. Okay.
Well, how were we to know?
Hi, Gregor, though.
Yeah.
Okay, so it ends with this image of this, you know, alphabet soup spinning, and none of the words aren't coming together yet, but they beckon. And it's a perfect example of what a form, a litany, and just the concrete details of experience, what it can lead you to. It said to him with that soup, someday, lad, you will use these letters to make meaning of trauma.
I put that poem in the chat too.
Oh,
A little,
good,
so
good, good.
people can
Yes.
check it out. It's a short poem for what he accomplishes in it. It's like
Mhm.
insanely short, you know.
It seems simple, um, but simplicity is complicated in language to get it right.
Um, I was thinking about before this, but also right now, the on a certain podcast where we talked before,
What
you
would that be, darling?
you told me, and you were quoting from a book by
Mhm.
um that in every symptom is a seed of power.
Yeah. That,
And yeah, just you
yeah,
go.
that was something I learned as a therapist, I hope. And that is, in Western medicine, we tend to think of symptoms as, you know, problems to be eradicated, so if somebody has a complicated relationship with food, back then called eating disorder, then your job is to make that eating disorder go away. And I started thinking about, for instance, suffragettes who went on hunger strikes, and the how synonymous a hunger strike is with, um, for instance, adolescent anorexic behavior. Um, So, what if, and then I read that phrase, in every symptom is a seed of power. What if what we do when we sit together in therapy is try to sort of tease out the seed of power in these things that we want to make go away? And a really good general example is depression. You know, what is the seed of power in depression? Um, what is it, how is depression functioning in relation to that thing that isn't being expressed, or, um, So, and I believe me, I take an antidepressant. I'm not saying there's no such thing as clinical physical depression, but there are aspects of all mental illnesses that are that are that are worth understanding, I guess, in a literary way, and that is to understand what's buried beneath the symptom. And if nothing else, that can give you a way of kind of taking hold, or it helps to understand why one feels the way one does, even if you can't eradicate it. Um,
Yeah.
you met, a good example is the anger that might be one of the seeds of power at the base of something like disordered eating or depression. Um, that there's, especially when I was practicing, um, women in anger were seen as antithetical. It was dangerous to express it. And if you expressed it, you were a bitch. So, what happens to the energy? How do you keep that anger bottled? And a lot of times it's the symptom, whatever it is, that sort of throws a wet rag on the rage, um, and and keeps it under wraps so that you can walk down the street without getting um, attacked or name called or whatever for your rage. When I look back and think about my career in that realm, there's a kind of innocence that I'm also exploring in the poems and modern poetry, a kind of weird, dangerous innocence almost, of how much, I mean, and you can't wish that you knew more. That's the evolution that comes with living your life, whether it's in language or just your emotional life. And that is, you can't know more than you know at a given time. You can only stay open um, to learning more about it. And so when I look back, I think um, there's a thinness, I guess, to what I feel I knew then, or to the way we all sort of thought about life and gender and all of that, that has changed so much in the years that I've been on this earth. So, the main thing, I think one of the central things that doing any kind of art making can do is to keep you open to taking the next steps, to collectively finding your way to a more nuanced way of thinking about things.
Well, thank you for bringing us back to modern poetry too. I was hoping you might read a poem, Juke, from the book.
Oh,
Then
yeah,
maybe we could write a little bit inspired
sure.
by the poem.
Yeah, and probably what I'm going to ask people to do after I read this poem is it might be just list making, because we're in a weird situation for actually kind of going into yourself to write a poem. But first, I'll read Juke from modern poetry. Um, oh my God. So Juke is set in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where my mom had a little, at first, a one-room little shack where we would go up and stay. And I guess the rest will make sense. Juke. What kind of juke do you prefer? For me, it's the kind with 3 songs and 37 blank title strips. 3 songs and 2 are Lukenbach, Texas. The third is beautiful and arcane, but the record skips. I prefer the 3-song Juke and the 3-toothed human smile. I found the Juke of my dreams in a bar called Chums. Chums had quotation marks around it. No clue the origin or meaning of the quotation marks. It was a prime number of a bar, and now it's dead. One night, drinking half and halves, half beer, half tomato juice, with schnapps chasers, a cheap source of hallucination. A soon to be defrocked Catholic priest, Vic, my mother, and me, our faces streaked blue with pool chalk, Juke red as a beating heart, and just a strip of hollyhocks and a tree line between us and the northern lights. I was young. I looked like a Rubens painting of a woman half eaten by moths. What lucky debauchery. The ride back on a washboard dirt road, taking everything for granted, flipping off the aurora borealis like it was some 3-toothed human in flashy clothes, dancing to get my attention. I wasn't a mean drunk then, just honest. Next morning, Mom walked in on the naked priest in the shack's garage, washing himself with a rag and cold water from the well in a metal dishpan. I'd later do dishes in that pan and wash my hair in that pan. We popped popcorn on the one burner wood burning stove and ate it out of that pan. I'm talking about a time and a place. All I can say of it is that it was real. The song choices were limited, so the grooves were dug deep. Oh God. Um, so yeah, I mean, there it is. I guess that definition of innocence that to just be in a place without sort of I gotta say, no screens, um, no construction of a self-image, just being in this place and being willing to be an asshole, to be young and to be dumb and to just absorb what's around you and let your ego play, you know? So, what, James?
I was just gonna say, and let your ego go. I mean, like there you are, like eating popcorn out of the priest's genital washpan, you know?
Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, there's some, and this is true of your poems too. There are no airs. I mean, this is true about you, I think, as well. There's just like this insistence on real life, right?
Hmm.
Like this is my life, these are the details of it, and I'm gonna hang on to them for dear life, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That I would say that was the most amazing time of my life right there and then. And we slept. I mean, there were mice eating the couch. We didn't have running water. We didn't have heat. We used an outhouse. Um, but it was real. It was
Yeah.
real.
There's another poem where you end with your mother sleeping like on the stacks of like on
Oh, sugar sacks. Yeah.
sugar. Yeah, sugar
Uh-huh.
sacks. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
back in the Depression when they hoarded sugar. Her aunt, who they lived with, hoarded sugar in sacks, cloth sacks. And my mom, just as a way to have privacy, made herself a bed on those sugar sacks. Um, that's, you feel the groundedness of that, sleeping on bags of sugar in the basement when you're, 8, 9 years old.
Yeah.
It's just, and it doesn't, it's not up for scrutiny. It's not about virtue. It's just about sugar. Sugar, honey.
Well, I
Yeah.
don't want to stop us from writing, so but I'm thinking that like uh, place um place and time, you're really good at getting that into the poem.
Yeah. So, my prompt is simple, and that is maybe just take 5 minutes and think back, remember your way back to a place and a time in which your life felt that grounded and real, concrete, and maybe lacking in virtue, um, maybe no conventional structure, get up, go to school, go to work, um, become someone, just feeling embodied, feeling in your body in the world, and make a list, just an improvised list of the concrete things that you remember in that time and place, the sense details, nouns, what are the things you recall? Because those details are the seeds of images. And once you start remembering, you'll remember more. So, what are the things that made you feel in the groove in that time and place? And just make a list for now. And you know, take 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll talk when you return to
I'm
that.
putting 5 minutes on the clock right now.
Okay. And if you want to, turn off your cameras or whatever, that's fine.
We have about 30 seconds left, so you might want to finish your list.
If people want to just put some details in the chat, it might be fun to be able to see just, a couple details from your list.
That's my timer. Oops.
Ding.
Yeah. Yeah, if people want to share just like one thing they put on their list, we can make a
Mhm.
list of the lists.
Yeah, I hope you got something out there. And um, circle of folding chairs.
I know where that is.
Yeah, hula hoops in the street, fried catfish going soggy in the to-go box.
That's right.
The wind ate my hair.
Oh, little
Fireflies smelled
house.
must and mold. Green
Green.
hammock swing. Oh, I love this. Muscles working and still working. Yeah. Little blue oscillating fan. Trash can. Driving west to Colorado, the slow climb. Kissing the Mr. Softy ice cream man.
Oh, this is wonderful.
I know. Now I just want to play
Right?
the last Peter Pan bus out of town. Mrs. Coyne's backyard candy store across the street, 8-track cassette, salt and pepper taste of cheap ramen. God, I'm in my senses.
Right?
I
Yeah.
I just realized I have a body. Holy shit.
It sort of brings up for me your poem Rhapsody, where you
Yeah.
say, to return to the world, I must learn how to love the world again. And like this list is making me love the world again.
Me
Even
too.
like opening that when someone said trash can, I like smelled my trash from this morning that I bundled up before I left the house, you know?
Yes.
And it's I mean kind of gross, but like also like I was in a body and I loved
Yeah.
delivering that trash to the anyway. But I was just wondering about how do we get back into the world? How do we learn how to love the world again? And maybe you could read Rhapsody for us and maybe talk a little bit about
Okay.
that.
Well, let me just say for um God, I'm just in love with all these, but the um the next step then, so you've got all these delicious details. Cigarette smoke on a sore throat.
Yeah.
Yeah, baby. Popping my skill ball at the end of her life. Um, yeah, the these are the things I want to say that nobody can take away. Nobody can take them away. And they're not good. And they're not, if they're beautiful in a different way than we're told constitutes beauty. And so take those and generate more. And just, I mean, what I did writing Juke was just start with that place, Chums, and, that bar, that time of my life, and get us there, get yourself there. Remember your way back, remember your way back, and tell us the story of that place. And, see where it ends up. One of my main kind of non-rules of writing poems is that the poem is wiser than we are. So let the poem guide you rather than struggling it into submission. So see where your mind took you to this particular place and time. So follow it and tell us the story of it and see where you end up. It is, I think, the antidote to the absolutely numbing crap that we're currently dealing with. to remember there is a world, there are places, there are that we have the senses, that we can get our bare feet on the ground. I have a friend actually who has some memory problems, and when I walk my dog, my previous dog was Bear, my current dog is Stella, and almost every time when I'm walking my dog, she comes out of her house barefooted in the cold and says, "Is that Bear?" And I say, "No, it's Stella." And Bear died. And I was thinking, I mean, I love how present she is with that detail. And then it brings me back to a reality that I need to replay over and over again and grieve. It isn't Bear, it's another dog. Um, and she takes me there, with her bare feet on the cold ground. So see where you can take yourself with that little prompt and with that list once we're done. Okay, so Rhapsody. Um, um, so what was you had a question? Oh, how do we love the world again? Yeah. Rhapsody is really kind of a brutal, funny poem, and it's a poem where all bets were off. The thesis question, or the hypothetical question of modern poetry was basically that: how do I begin to love the world again? How do I begin to love the poem again? How do I find a way to love again in some sort of new definition? So I'll read Rhapsody, and it's kind of, you know, well, I'll read it. Um, I think, we talked about rage earlier. I think this is a poem that emerges out of rage, but um, there's something wonderful about what rage gives us in the potency of truth telling. So a rhapsody in music, we Rhapsody in Blue, listen to that while you write. Um, and rhapsody is an emotion, that sort of elation. So there's an elation of anger and truth telling here. I like to call marriage state sponsored fucking. To return to the world, I must learn how to love the world again. My problem is with the word again. I don't like repeat performances. I come from a long line of hungry people who hate leftovers. The only movie I can watch more than once is the original Frankenstein. I like the present tense of spectacle. It's like eating an over sour pickle wakes you up but hurts your gonads. I got good at romance early by choosing to wear pink knee socks to the funeral. I sat on the floor of the hearse on the ride from the church to the cemetery, making the best of it. That's romance. It's like when my mother took me to see Mary Poppins for my 8th birthday, and it turned her into a flaming bitch. I understand why you didn't like it, I said to her, but I really loved it because I'm a kid. Actually, I hated it as much as she did. That's romance. Or when she went to the slaughterhouse to pick up a cow heart for my science project. It was still warm, wrapped in white paper. They handed it over like a newborn, and she gagged all the way home. That's romance. Some poet wrote that he adores economy and requires precision. I actually looked for antonyms: extravagance, ignorance, imprudence, negligence, squandering. I felt like a poor kid who finds a quarter and gorges themselves on penny candy. From then on, everything I created or promoted would be rococo, bows and beams of sunlight festooning the candelabra of the bewigged swing set. I have oppositional poetry disorder. I want to express my opinion about people expressing their opinions. If only I could jump on the back of a motorcycle and ride into the sweet potato field where the mother deer flash their hooves and roar, and lay flat on the snake-laced ground at midnight and watch the empty spectacle of the numb satellites, mindless circling that looks a lot like a boob who thinks they've found nirvana. And to observe with a jaundiced eye the skunk family march in a line out of the cedar swamp and eat crayfish from a wash tub. I want a papa bear to split the tree of life down the middle, scattering the wormy apples. His furry, berry stained maw, such a display of what used to be called reality. I want the next turn I make to be unearned, like getting gang banged in a greenhouse at age 14 and calling it a honeymoon. I guess now that would be called trauma, a word I've grown to hate. It's like a cute puppy who got old and whose only trick is shitting in the house, or a band-aid they call flesh colored that only matches the flesh of the owner of the band-aid company. A word can be overused into emptiness, which is also a banality, so don't tell anybody you love them. If you call fucking making love, I'll kill you in your sleep. Don't say I do. It's what suckers say, what liars say. Never take an oath wearing clothes that have to be hung on padded hangers. When women are murdered, people on TV always comment on the victim's cheerfulness, like being a songful canary should have kept her from getting her throat slit. My advice is to live on a street in which no one will say when you're murdered, things like that don't happen here. Live in a neighborhood where every house is considered a scar on the face of France. My adult son calls me at noon to ask if I ever loved his father. How can I express that marital love is 12 banalities ago? It's like asking if I like the taste of peaches when I was a toddler. I preferred smoke, catalpa worms, bowling trophies, and using tweezers to remove the lit up ass of a firefly so I could smear it around my finger like a wedding ring. The adage is that a cynic is a broken romantic, except for Arthur Rimbaud, who was born and died a misanthropic shrew. I would like to conjecture that a romantic is a cynic who has been infected with resurrection metaphors and believes in the integrity of a good line break. I know someone who saw a famous lounge singer carried out of a Vegas hotel on a stretcher with a broken light bulb in his ass. Be that guy. Don't be Jesus. Be the shroud. Don't be the savior. Be the stain. Oh God, help me, James.
Well, in another poem, Allegory, in one of the sections you write that about the poetry of hope and the poetry of rage,
Mm-hmm.
and how they fuel and look at each other. And when I was listening to you read just now Rhapsody, I was thinking about cynicism, and I was thinking that doesn't quite cynical doesn't describe the tone, the poet's voice, right? There's a like But there's something about rage and hope looking at each other in that poem.
Mm-hmm.
And I was
Well,
wondering if you might want to talk about that.
well, there, once you've lived on Earth, there's no hope without moving through rage. Um, and we rage against the death of certain kinds of hope or certain kinds of illusions of hope. So when we talk about hope, what are we hoping for? I always wonder about that. Well, we just have to have hope, James. We just have to have hope. Well, what are we hoping for? Um, and that poem, I mean, it's like Shirley Temple in the movie where she like um tosses all the chess pieces off the board with her little hand. It's like all the chess pieces, all the checkers are thrown off the table. And it's a very it sometimes I think about, what did Sylvia Plath feel when she wrote Lady Lazarus or Daddy, you do not do anymore, black shoe. It isn't, you're right, it isn't cynical. It isn't hopeful. It's, again, real. It's real. And it's the um, power to not um, bullshit yourself and other people about your virtue or your goodness or your it's to take the power back for me, from being a victim. It's there's a power in having survived, and the power to name things as they are is a really tasty power. Hmm.
Yeah, now I'm thinking about another line where you say something about you can't hide in the thing that you're making. And
Yeah, it's in the poem Curl, which is early in the book. You can't hide um, from what you made inside what you made. Yeah. So you can't hide in the poem. You can't hide. In a way, it's almost like God. You can't hide from what you created inside what you created, you know. Um,
yeah, you can't bullshit yourself.
no, the poem can't be a hiding place anymore, you know. Um,
Mm. It's a space of confrontation. Like you were saying, that
yes.
that threshold, right? You can close the door for a minute if you need to,
Hmm.
right? But you're gonna open it back up.
Yeah, and you're going to stand in that threshold and speak. And all the poems aren't going to have that same tone, you know. Um, but now and then, yeah, what I discovered in the writing of modern poetry, this book, was just the you know, I'm so grateful in a weird way for the capacity to tell the truth as I see it. And when you asked me earlier, how do we begin to love the world again? If we, some of you may have never stopped. So I don't want to make any assumptions, but to love the world is to tell the truth about it and also to experience its peacock tail of details. And they're not good, they're not necessarily virtuous, but there they are. They're James in the morning smelling the garbage. um, they're eating popcorn out of the genital wash tub. Where also the skunks ate their crayfish and a lot
No.
of other shit, right? um, it's the real, and we're so frigging directed to the unreal, to the lie, to the airbrushed, that to re experience the real is to fall in a kind of love with the world again.
One of the hardest things for me, as a person and also as a poet maybe, um, is loving myself,
Yes.
accepting myself. I can look out at the world and rage and love that stuff, but looking inwardly, um, yeah, it makes me embarrassed, and
Mhm.
all those things that you get when you start to cry in front of your therapist for the first time, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to end on a poem of self-love, and I think we could choose Love Letter or we could choose Gertrude Stein. And I'm sorry to say we have to choose, but we have to choose.
Oh
Which
yeah,
one would
we
you like
do.
to?
We
Which
always got
one?
to choose, baby.
Right? And
Yeah.
listen, but if you buy Diane Seuss's book, Modern Poetry, you don't have to choose. You can have both of them.
And you can sleep with them all.
That's right.
I sleep with so many books, there's no room for me anymore.
I love it. But yeah, which one would you like to
I'll
read?
read Gertrude, I think.
I love
Yeah.
it.
Okay. So, for those of you who don't know her, Gertrude Stein was a writer. It sort of Picasso era and in Picasso's realm, and very experimental work. And Picasso did a portrait of her that is sort of beginning to look like Cubism. It's all the planes of her face and it's sort of like um, this wise, hefty, solid woman, but also you're seeing her nuances and her edges in this painting. And the only other thing you need to know is that she wrote a famous book called Tender Buttons, and you'll hear that at the end of the poem. Okay. So this takes place in my house during the pandemic. Gertrude Stein. I'd just brushed the dog there on the dog's couch. I was wearing a black, well, to call it a gown is a criminal overstatement, a black rag. It became clear to me, and when I say clear, I mean the moment went crystal cathedral. I could see my life from not a long shot, but what they used to call an increment apart, a baby step to the right or left of myself, about the width of a corrective baby shoe. There I was, broad shouldered, witch shaped, without the associated magic, with my dog in my shack. Once mauve faded to pink, beyond sex or reason, a numbness had set in. Gertrude Stein, Picasso's portrait of her, that above it all or within it all, look on not a face, but the planes that suggest a face. The eyes aren't really lined up right, or the real eyes are peering from behind the cutout shapes of eyes. The couch had been a sort of not a gift, but a donation of sorts from a person with plenty of money. When it was dragged into my house, it was already stately, but with worn patches and stains. A trinity of dogs over time had laid claim to it, three egotists. To brush the dog meant I had to visit it in its monarchy. And in that visit, that single prismatic increment, I saw I'd become Maybe all arrive in their own time, some before dying, some after. A draped artifact, haystack or headstone rising out of the plains. And then, with fascination and a degree of sadness and even objectivity, I loved, as I once loved tender buttons, myself.
People are clapping on their,
Thank
yeah,
you.
as well they should. Me too.
Thank you. Yeah, that I remember that moment. I'm so glad I have a poem from that moment because it helps me remember that moment. Sitting on that couch with Bear and feeling that, just for a moment, nothing lasts forever, but to have experienced that moment, that crystallized moment of self love.
Did you see yourself from outside yourself
Both, yes, that and experience myself from within.
at the same time?
Yeah, and it wasn't anything I had done or achieved. F that, F that, F that. It was just my being. It's just my being. My quirky ass sitting on the dying couch with the dying dog being. And that was it.
That couch is like the linchpin for the poem because it sort of drags the couch. I put the portrait in the chat.
Oh,
Um,
thank
Sort
you.
of drags the couch out of the Gertrude Stein
Mm-hmm.
painting, out of the Picasso into your house.
Yes.
And it sort of melds in that moment that where imagination and reality are the same.
Yes.
They share the same plane.
And
And
I'm kind of her too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
What?
yeah, yeah.
I'm
And
sorry I
so
interrupted. Go
no,
on.
no, 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 not at all. But there's this, yeah, the way that he paints her feels so two-dimensional,
Mm-hmm.
and then it becomes three-dimensional. The
Mm-hmm.
couch, the woman on the couch has now a life and an imagination and a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Also, someone put Gertrude Stein's sonic portrait of Picasso, if I told
Mm-hmm.
him, in the chat too. So which I love that one. So when did you just was the couch dragging it from the painting into your house? Was that a moment that you've consciously knew when you were writing the poem?
No. Uh-uh. No, as I said, I just kind of start somewhere and let it take me. And there it was. I had seen that painting, I guess, recently. And yeah, I kind of felt, Stein in that painting and in life, she has this kind of solidity um, of body. And I could kind of feel that in myself for a moment.
Do you think it's all browns and lines, and do you feel like I always feel like that painting isn't, if somebody painted me like in all those browns or whatever, I don't know that I'd love the painting of myself. And I don't think she loved the painting.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I'm also wondering if that's a reclamation of some kind for Gertrude,
Mm.
and if finding oneself fascinating in even in our sadness or even alongside our sadness, um helps us get to joy, helps us get to
Mm.
self-love.
I like that idea. And it actually, that might be a good prompt to send people away with. If if you have modern poetry, and also this poem is online, this poem, but also a poem called Love Letter, um, then consider writing uh, a poem that gets to self-love for a moment. And what was it you just said? The fascination with oneself,
Yeah,
or
the ways that we find ourselves fascinating, like why do I do that is a way of like you're fascinated with yourself, right?
Yeah.
Why am I sad but about this, right? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. So to find, to write a poem in which you're sort of incrementally in cubes, in edges, find your way toward a moment of experiencing yourself with love, not in a sentimental way, but in like, I exist. Here I am in this body, you
Mm.
know? Um, yeah. And
I
Love Letter, the poem that you can also find online, is really somebody asked me to write a poem that is a love letter. And I thought, I just can't do it in any traditional sense. I don't love anybody that way. And so then what I did was sort of start taking apart love and what love can be now. Everything in that book is sort of what can it be now? You know, I'm a shattered mess in a lot of ways. So what can it be now? And out of that question and out of whatever answers it comes a coherence and maybe brings the shatter into some sort of wholeness. And so when we talk about mental health and poetry, I think what we're really saying is this is not about fixing or healing or gluing or being able to say, oh well, it's it's really about experiencing moments of clarity, um, about the world, about the past, and about yourself. Just moments of clarity. And those are really um, precious.
As you say in another poem about memory, I think it's called Weeds. Memory is instructive, but don't live there.
Exactly. And I can, man, especially in my solitude, I can live there, like an old hermit witch, because I have a lot of interesting memories to live in, you know.
I mean, selling rubber underwear, fetish underwear.
Rubber underpants.
I
Yeah.
mean, hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Or sleeping on the porch all night with Mickle, back in the 70s. Yeah, there's so many. They're not good, they're not bad, they just are real. So, can we end with that? Keep your poems in your life real, value the real over perfection,
yeah.
and take care of yourselves in that in every regard, but that one too. You don't have to you don't have to be anybody's version of perfect. It's much more interesting to be real. Mm-hmm.
I just want to say thank you very much for this evening, Di, for being so honest and real with us, like your
Sure.
poems are. This has just been a really wonderful evening to talk about. As someone said, like they never really talked about or thought about poetry and mental health together. Um, and this has been really instructive and
It's
lovely. And we
this,
got two poems.
yeah. And it's the same, poetry and therapy or mental health. It's the same song, different dance, I think,
We were saying poetry, the poem is wiser than you are, and I was thinking that's like the relationship between yourself and a therapist, right? Like,
That's right. That's right.
therapist is there to help us.
And the therapist and the person, that's the thing you learn is that you're also seeing yourself in the sufferer,
Mm,
um
mm.
James, I appreciate you and thank you for sort of being the sonnet that held, the form that held us together. Thank you. And Greg Orr, I hope you're still there. The other Greg Orr. Greg, you're still there. Greg Orr, I'm glad it was you. Greg Orr is a musician and an amazing partner and father and friend, and I love him. So I'm glad it was you, Greg Orr.
I love that. All right, that's a great place to end. Everyone, please take good care of yourself.
Yeah.
Out for resources if you need them. And I hope you all write fabulous, fabulous poems after tonight too. So thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks, everybody. Love to all. Truly, truly love to all.
Mwah.
Mwah.
Good night, everyone.
Night.